All right. Well, welcome to the session on urgency and governance. I'm Ken Alex with the Center for Law, Energy, and Environment at UC Berkeley. And I have the great privilege of running this session with Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara. He'll be joining us shortly. Before we get to the commissioner, who I'm sure everybody will be interested in hearing from, given the current situation and all the issues he's dealing with, I have a few sort of opening remarks and comments around urgency and emergency and governance and the like. I will say, by way of background, that I've spent many years working for Jerry Brown at the Attorney General's office, at the governor's office, and even to some extent at UC Berkeley. So at this point, some of my views probably reflect a little bit of what you just heard from the governor. And I will add that I've been working on climate issues probably since at least 1989. And so I have some amount of frustration over the concept of urgency as it relates to climate change. I would say that we are a fair amount better at declaring climate change emergency than we are at taking emergency or even urgent action. So Amelia, maybe put up the slides. I have a couple of slides reflecting a 16-year-old's view of what it means to have an emergency and an emergency response. Of course, he's a rather famous, or at the time was a rather famous 16-year-old, but I think a lot of what she had to say rings very true in terms of urgency and emergency. And there's Commissioner Lara, welcome.
How are you?
Good. So I'm gonna chat about the general topic of urgency for a minute, and then turn it over to you after I do that, and then probably have a few questions both from me and the audience. So I'll yak for a few more minutes, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
So Amelia, you can toggle between the two slides as you see fit. Just some more quotes from Greta about what it means to have a climate emergency and how we might respond. And I would say it's true across the board that we are not really acting in an emergency or oftentimes in an urgent sense. I would say that's true for corporations, for governments, for NGOs and communities as well, and that we have to figure out how we change some of that level of response. So let me talk a little bit more about this set of issues, and then we'll turn to really one of the key elements of urgency and governance, which is the subject matter of Commissioner Lara. How do we handle risk and the role of insurance as elements of urgency and governance? So, all right. I get to be a little bit provocative since just doing a quick intro. What would we do differently if we really thought that this was an emergency and that we were acting in that way? Would we consider things like nuclear power? I mean, I grew up in a time when that was almost unthinkable, and now I think we have to at least consider it. We act very differently in circumstances that we would describe as a more acute emergency. And the Los Angeles wildfire situation, I think, is an example of that. We recognize that we have to take some shortcuts, that we have to do things differently, and but at the same time, that there also has to be some element of governance so that it's not just the Wild West. So what will it take to move us to a sense of urgent implementation overall. And I think Governor Brown talked a little bit about that. I echo that. Of course, we see things like the LA wildfire situation, the hurricanes in Florida, et cetera. Is there something that moves us to the point where we say, all right, we actually have to take action? So for example, what will it take to get banks to stop investing in fossil fuel projects, stop funding them? I note that this week, Wells Fargo announced that it's abandoning its 2050 net zero goal. That's not exactly the sense of urgency that the moment requires. Other corporations are pulling back as well. And as Governor Brown said, even the state of California that has done quite a substantial amount, there are places where needs to be bolder. Of course, there's issues of political will, and we're seeing that set of problems at the federal level where an entire political party seems to be inactive on the issue of climate change. And the President of the United States is moving into fossil fuels and taking the words climate change off of government websites. And then I would say the same for NGOs, that I think they often have a challenge of being very focused on particular interests and sometimes find it hard to compromise out of that sense as well. And I would add foundations similarly are sometimes focused on more narrow funding options and are not always as strategic and consolidated as I think maybe the moment calls for. So having said all that, we really can't have a free-for-all. And I think Los Angeles, again, is a good example. Some of the earlier conversation today was about how do we build back Los Angeles in a sense of community, not just every individual homeowner and landowner for themselves, but are there ways that we can work together to make that a more realistic and appropriate rebuild that is resilient and incorporates standards of resilience. And by the same token, at a larger scale, we don't really want countries or individuals or states to have their own concepts of what geoengineering might be and start taking actions that with unknown consequences. So there needs to be a balance. And so this kind of moves me to the point where I want to bring Commissioner Lara into the conversation. He's at a cutting edge of so many issues around climate change. How do we move forward in a way that considers risk, that has a sense of how we govern and operate in a way that protects people and property, and allows them to have some stability around concepts of insurance. So with that, Commissioner Lara, I'm going to just turn it over to you for whatever you want to talk about, and then I'm sure both I and others may have some questions.
Great, thank you, Ken. You brought up so many valid points, and it was always great to hear our governor, and it sparked so many. I think it's a natural segue to what we're talking about in our segment. For climate adaptation and resilience to be effective, as effective as possible, and to most importantly protect communities from wildfires, flood, extreme heat, sea level rise, atmospheric rivers. We need to be implementing policies that align and build off each other. We cannot be operating in these different silos. And for the insurance sector, we have been focused on the protection gap, which is the gap between the cost of climate impacts that are insured and the costs that are uninsured. And we are at a critical moment for the insurance sector and financial regulators overall. As climate impacts accelerate, insurance protection gaps have grown, leaving more and more people, households, and businesses increasingly vulnerable. closing the protection gaps really require all of us, homeowners, local leaders, businesses, insurance sector stakeholders, financial regulators, and risk scientists to set priority on risk reduction and really expand on insurance options. A widening protection gap, we all know, will exacerbate inequity and slow recovery in the face of more frequent and severe disasters. I know there's a lot of talk about Los Angeles and my hometown, born and bred in Los Angeles. But I'll tell you that this is my 115th wildfire since I took office in 2019. And in January, we had 15 fires in LA County and in San Diego County, just to put it in perspective. And so this is not going away. And I've been working on climate policy for over a decade, establishing rules and incentives for reducing dangerous emissions from heavy-duty trucks, invisible super pollutant emissions from freezers and air conditioners, and investments in nature that reduce climate risk from communities. Governor Brown, just seeing him reminded me, who just spoke minutes ago, I worked together with him to put in place the first super pollutant emissions reduction act with 2030 deadlines for reducing emissions of HFCs, methane, and black carbon. That bill still remains the landmark law and a critical worldwide effort to reduce super pollutants. So when we look at implementing solutions that reduce emissions and improve resilience, insurance can no longer be an afterthought or a single subject on a week-long panel at a climate meeting at COP. Insurance needs to be front and center of our discussions on climate and sustainability. I'll tell you, as the California insurance regulator, I oversee the largest insurance market in the country, fourth in the world. Today, I'm going to talk to you about some of the innovative strategies that we've built in California, and we are guiding the actions to create a more climate resilient insurance market here in our state that can really be a model for the rest of the world to follow. A modern, sustainable insurance market incentivizes safety and reduces risks, as Governor Brown was saying earlier. It does not retreat from high-risk areas, but instead it utilizes long-term strategy to encourage adaptation and resilience to continue providing coverage for climate-vulnerable consumers. So, we have been innovating and pursuing new tools to plan and help us prepare, from completing the first ever extreme heat insurance protection gap report, building the first ever extreme heat ranking tool in California, enacting the largest wildfire insurance reforms in 30 years to promote availability and affordability. We're establishing community insurance pilot projects through new approaches like parametric and inclusive insurance products. We're partnering with our California universities on creating the nation's first catastrophic model on wildfire. And just as Governor Brown was saying, guess who I'm working with? Hand in hand with the insurance commissioner from Florida, in Florida, they have a public cat model on hurricanes. And they've been helping us develop our catastrophic model around wildfires. So we have to be uncomfortable with working with other states that might not align with us, but we have the same vision, because these catastrophes are not respecting, state borders, political borders. And at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, that's exactly what we've been doing. Governor Brown said, let's not call things, climate change. And so as we're preparing our own climate committee at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, we're calling it catastrophe risk and resilience, because some insurance commissioners who are like-minded like me can't politically say climate change. And so we're working with other state regulators and our colleagues to learn lessons on where local risk mitigation has been successful. I'm going to mention a couple of those as well today. These are all efforts that bring together local risk reduction and give and provide insurance access. New community resilience strategies have to include insurance. Here's one example. Around extreme heat income insurance was launched in 2023 by a fascinating group called Climate Resilience for All to help women in India recover lost wages due to climate-driven extreme heat events. The program is activated and active at the threshold of an extreme heat condition aligned with temperatures expected to impact health incomes. Essentially, we don't want women in India out in the streets selling their goods or doing the work outdoors when it's detrimental to their health. Guess what? This past June, more than 46,000 women received income insurance payments directly to them, providing important stability and protection. And more than $500,000 were paid out to these women. So these type of products that are now coming into the market to address specific climate issues is the future. And they really can address the growing financial risks and health impacts of extreme heat events like here in California and around the world. In July, our department published the California's first California Extreme Heat Cost Report that gives us actual data on protection gaps from heat and the level of financial risk for household, communities, and regions that are going to be facing extreme heat events. Heat waves generate a protection gap that is still largely invisible, with the widening uninsured costs related to health, infrastructure, life insurance, economic activity, farming, and local governments, really demonstrating that the events carry financial risk for households and local governments and businesses. One of the important findings from our report is that the overall financial risk of the cost from just 7 heat waves that we studied, the cost was substantial, $7.7 billion. This is only from 7 heat waves, and the overall cost of the heat we know is going to be much higher. So when we look at the impact of the devastating, tragic wildfires in California, Portugal, Canada, Australia, and many of our fellow Western US states, the urgency of the risk is really clear. And in California in 2021, we brought together all the state agencies for the first time. I still couldn't believe that this was never done, that the work on wildfire risk and agreed on a consensus home hardening and community mitigation standards, which we call Safer from Wildfires. After building that consensus, we enacted regulations in 2022 to require all insurers to incorporate these actions into their wildfire risk pricing. So the California Safer from Wildfires regulations are really the first in the country and are one step towards an insurance sector that encourages, as the governor was saying, the insurance sector encouraging risk reduction so that insurance can continue to be available and reliable. The impact of these rules will grow over time, and we are working with local governments to align those priorities to improve insurability. Again, our department is also implementing, like I said earlier, the largest regulatory reforms in 30 years to bring insurance availability back to wildfire distressed areas. And we're going to allow risk management tools, including catastrophic modeling and reinsurance, which have been excluded from the insurance company rate filings for decades. California is the only state that wasn't allowing these two tools and requiring commitments by insurance companies to write more policies in the areas that are facing an insurance availability crisis. This is a unique and historic agreement between the regulator, insurance companies, and their trade associations, along with climate scientists and fire and our fire experts as well. So this means that, for the first time, believe it or not, in California, we're going to be using data-driven approaches to create new metrics that identify where wildfire insurance distress is occurring and determine how insurer commitments would be established and be monitored. So we're tracking in real time insurers coming back into these communities, depopulating our FAIR plan, and once again competing for your jobs, for your business. So we are implementing the regulatory changes this year. And once the strategy is implemented, we're going to monitor the reaction from the insurance market. We got all of this done. And those of you who have worked in government or worked in the regulatory space, we got this done in 1 year. We were literally flying the plane and building it at the same time. So where there's a will, there's a way. We understood that this was of extreme significance, and we got this done. So again, look, building stronger, hardened homes and neighborhoods are essential to local risk reduction, and US states are demonstrating the value of home hardening programs. 11 states and 11 departments of insurance are growing and have state-led risk mitigation programs. For example, the Department of Insurance in Alabama has the Strengthen Alabama Homes, and it's a program that offers wind mitigation grants. This is cold hard cash in people's hands, tax-free, and helping them reach their IBHS fortified standard. In 2024, Alabama reached the milestone of 50,000 homes that qualified for the fortified roof standard set by IBHS. Economic researchers have shown that hardened homes are more valuable and in the marketplace. And this program has improved insurance availability and insurability in these high-risk areas. And now we're starting to see a diverse states are working on these benefit programs and resilience programs, including Louisiana, Oklahoma, Hawaii, and Texas. And in many cases, the initial funding really creates momentum, and then local governments also invest. And so as I wrap up, I just want to where do we go from here? What does the insurance market in California look like in the future? Our market is not only the insurance industry or just the homeowner, it is the public that is seeking insurance. It's the insurance companies, it is the regulator. And so my vision is that, look, a modern sustainable insurance market is going to incentivize safety and reduce risk. It's not going to retreat from high risk areas, but instead, again, utilizing a long-term strategy to encourage adaptation and resilience and continue providing coverage to consumers. A market that incentivizes safety, a market that embraces innovation and micro and inclusive insurance products, and a market which prioritizes nature-based insurance solutions. And so, yes, that is our new point, nature-based insurance solutions. If we implement those regulatory reforms in a way that aligns with stronger risk mitigation, we can get to a more sustainable insurance marketplace, which is the ultimate goal of our Department of Insurance here in California.
Well, thank you for all of that. There's so many questions running through my head. But fortunately for you, we only have about 4 minutes, or for me.
I did the classic Governor Brown, just keep talking.
Exactly, I've lived that world. Well, let me ask you, you've touched on this, but obviously one of the challenges that we have in California is that some insurers are leaving the state. We've got State Farm as the biggest homeowner insurance. They have a huge bill in Los Angeles. Unlike a lot of insurers, their reinsurer is actually their parents. So there's billions of dollars that the parent is concerned about. There's some indication that some insurers are going to continue to leave. Is there, and this was a little bit of a question I was asked previously, but I want to ask you, do you see the potential for some larger bargain where the state and local governments are able to incorporate resilience requirements, resilience standards, and then the quid pro quo is that insurance companies write more policies, they stay in California, and they have greater competition? That seems to be, we're not quite where we need to be in terms of that trade-off, and I wonder if you see a route to that.
Yeah, so we have those standards already. We created those under the Safer from Wildfires standards for home building and mitigation. And the irony of all this is I was in Paradise the day before the fire started, announcing that Mercury was coming back into the market, Mercury Insurance. Since then, Farmers, again, has publicly said that they're expanding their footprint. CSAA, the Northern California, AAA from Southern California. And so we have companies now that we've really reformed our insurance market last year, that they're getting the tools that they need. Insurance companies are risk experts. They do not walk away from risk. It's got to be priced accordingly, and we have to allow them to use the latest technology to help educate us and help us understand where the risk is moving. Finally, California is moving in that direction. It took us, I don't know why it took so long, but we got that done. And by the way, we got it done. And when we were working on this, I says, okay, so what does the consumer get? What do I get, right? And I get the guarantee that they're coming back into the wildfire areas. And that's why this agreement was historic, because if they don't follow through, we're going to be monitoring. I have the legal authority to retract that rate and actually be able to refund consumers. And so again, this is a trust but verify in a very complex market. And I tell my fellow insurance commissioners, look, we are the largest market. We're going to feel this first. Don't wait until California comes to a theater near you. Start working on these transitions now. Other states already provide these tools, but guess what? They don't get any guarantee of insurance companies growing in their wildfire riskiest area. We got that done. And so we hope it could be a lesson for others, not only here in the US, but around the world that are also suffering from these wildfires.
So I sadly just have 1 minute left. So let me ask you one quick question. CAL FIRE this week came out with their new maps on extreme hazard areas. And I'm wondering how you're thinking of using those, and does that alter any of your strategy for the WUIs?
No, this is important data that I know a lot of people fear, but we need to be as accurate as possible so that we can address the issues head on. And this is why our catastrophic model and our public model are going to be important, because not only are we going to be using the insurance company's private models, but when we get our public model, it'll be that benchmark to make sure that we're all operating and there's a leveling off, so that we're not using, the private models without any checks and balances. That is really what the fear is of consumers, that these private models are going to be used to further discriminate who gets insurance and who doesn't. But this is why, at the same time, we're going to be getting recommendations from the working group in April that's led by Cal Poly Humboldt, who are really the experts on wildfire science. So, again, we got to trust but verify.
Thank you, Commissioner. Really, you're in the middle of so much here, and really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Appreciate you. Never a dull moment at the Department of Insurance these days.
Understood. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.